Welcome, everybody. How's it going? Just need to turn off the music in the back. Hope y'all are doing well wherever you are. Welcome to this week's Griscom stream. We got a lot to talk about today. We're going to talk about the eviction moratorium failure by the Democrats. The pretty exciting and interesting news that the NLRB has basically indicated that they find the tactics used by Amazon were illegal, potentially opening up the door for another union vote in Bessemer, Alabama, and a few other things too. But just to get going, I want to make sure that we start on a kind of lighter note, because I'm a big fan of Ben coming after this guy. I think James Lindsay is a real pushover and a twerp, and he's somebody who I don't have the patience. I'm sorry, y'all, to put up with it. But I do think it's worthwhile to sort of push back against people like James Lindsay. And for people who aren't familiar, that is the brain genius who was doing all those axe moves at the beginning of this stream. Yeah, I can tell that some people were watching our joint stream earlier last Saturday with the guys at This Is Revolution Pod. But let me just share this with y'all because I think it's pretty fun. Here we go. This has been making the point that, James Lindsay's new shtick is critical race theory, as it is with most of these other conservatives. James Lindsay argues that critical race theory, stages of history, primitive equity, slavery, segregation and apartheid, colorblind equality, racial equity, dictatorship of the anti-racist, and racial justice. Again, this is, I think Ben says it best here. This is basically an update of Jordan Peterson's Marxism equals postmodernism, censoring blue-haired college kids thesis, with a little bit more effort put into explaining it, which actually makes it even goofier, which I think is a pretty fair analysis there. I mean, basically the conflation and combination of Marxism and critical race theory has been a pretty predictable but nonetheless goofy iteration of the most recent kind of right-wing fear-mongering tactics. But James Lindsay responds and says, I just realized they mad about that tweet. Of course they are. Laugh out loud. Bullseye. The irony there is that, Ben actually isn't mad. And the reason I think Ben would be a great person to debate James Lindsay on this question is because Ben's not somebody who's going to get super worked up about this guy trying to attack the legacy of like the 1619 Project or critical race theory in general, right? Ben is somebody who'll take the good with the bad and be able to move on, because Ben at the end of the day is a Marxist and a socialist, and is not too interested in sort of, holding up the legacy of liberal thought, which again, Marxists and the left have very strong criticisms of these concepts. But of course, when people like James are talking about them, they're just talking about social justice, economic justice in general. And not any, they're not talking, James Lindsay is not talking to the actuality of what critical race theory is as a legal discipline, and just using as a stand-in, as Ben says, for, blue-haired college kids. So anyway, I think we got to make that happen. I think keeping the pressure up on James is worthwhile. Again, somebody who proclaims himself to be he's a self-identified expert on Marxism, postmodernism, and critical race theory, but he seems to have a very difficult grasp of those three concepts because he weaves those in constantly into one another. All right. Well, thanks so much, everybody, for being here. For people who are new, these are sort of more casual, taking questions from the chat. So let me see, what y'all are thinking. There's definitely a lot of stories I want to touch on, and tomorrow, we have our regularly scheduled show at 7 p.m. Central. We're going to be joined by Ryan Pollock, who's a union organizer here in Austin, Texas, with IBEW. We'll be talking about this really interesting report put out by the Texas AFL-CIO on climate change and what a just transition actually looks like. But anyway, let me see what... there's a lot of people getting worked up about my microphone. Sorry. Someone asked me, how would you describe the response a Majority Report and Left Reckoning got from the H3 Crowder Sam debate? I would have to say it'd probably be a better question to ask Matt than myself. I don't really have much to do with Majority Report, so in that sense, I'm just a watcher like all of y'all. But it seemed like it was definitely good for them, got them a lot of attention. Laura says, one of my good friends has been indoctrinated by Lindsay. He is even running for school board on an anti-CRT platform. That's a shame. I mean, that's the point. It's like, it's, you have to remind yourself that even though these guys are very goofy, they do, speak to a lot of folks, and they can bring in people. I mean, it's one reason that, for example, talking with Michael, why he figured it was so worthwhile to go in on those, the IDW folks, because, they do capture a lot of people who are sort of, searching for answers and things like that, and not engaging with them just because they're absurd, it's not a path towards victory. John wanted to know, and I appreciate the super chat, do you have any recommendations for leftist policy analysis of cyber information warfare? I work in the field, and everything I find is neocon or /neoliberal. I don't have any suggestions for you. I'd be really interested if anyone in the chat has any suggestions. Obviously, there's a lot of great left tech reporters out there, but I don't know anybody who's specifically doing cyber information warfare that's coming to mind right now. But if anybody has anyone, please let me know, and I'd be happy to share them with you, John. All right. Well, I think we should start then with the big news of the week, which is that the NLRB has made a statement on on what happened in Bessemer, Alabama, and how Amazon very clearly interfered with the results of those elections. Primary to the let me just read y'all top line here. This is from Reuters. E-commerce giant Amazon.com interfered with the union election by installing a mailbox to collect ballots and by distributing paraphernalia, encouraging employees to vote against organizing, according to a report by a U.S. National Labor Relations Board hearing officer. The NLRB official on Monday recommended a rerun of the landmark Amazon union election in Alabama, where employees overwhelmingly voted against making their warehouse the online retailer's first to organize in the United States. So again, for folks who are unfamiliar with the technical details of this does not mean that an election is happening, and it actually doesn't even mean that the review process is over. But this step, basically, for most people who watch these things closely, means that this is pretty much a sure thing, that at least the door will be open if the workers and the union want to hold that election again. That basically these results can be ignored and another union election can take place. Before we get to the kind of general outlook and strategy about that, I just wanted to note a couple things. One, we talked about this mailbox before the vote, and so were a lot of people who are following this story as well. And the mailbox on the facility was not some kind of small detail, right? That is now after the fact. You broke some kind of technicality. It was a legitimate attempt by Amazon to try to influence the vote. Why? One, Amazon flexed its muscle locally in the political scene to get that mailbox installed in the first place, because their first attempts to get that installed there were denied by the post office, right? But Amazon, because it's a massive corporation, has a lot of influence, was able to overturn that decision, right? So it should have been stopped right there and then, but Amazon was able to flex its muscle to basically go against, a federally owned institution. Two, there are security cameras that are on that mailbox, which is why this is basically being presented as an attempt for voter intimidation, because there's no doubt about it that going in and turning in your ballot in a place where you're being watched is frightening to folks in any circumstance, but especially at an organization like Amazon that tracks everything from the amount of time that it takes you to walk down the hallway to how often you're using the restroom. right? I mean, I'm sorry. You've conditioned your workers at this point at Amazon to constantly feel like they are under surveillance, right? And this moment, that's supposed to be a moment of democracy where people are able to, make their own decisions, make their voice heard. You're still watching them, right? What kind of message does that send? That's a pure and clear-cut example of intimidation. Not to mention all the other things that Amazon was doing, from lobbying county officials to change stoplights and things like that nearby, but also the fact that Amazon was passing out anti-union paraphernalia, buttons and things of that nature, while people were in front of their managers, right? People were being surveilled. They were trying to feel the waters out and to see if anybody was showing any pro-union sentiments, that they would recognize that Amazon is watching, and Amazon takes these things very seriously. It just is as clear as day, the attempts there to try to, attack and prevent people from having a free and fair election at that Amazon facility. So there's no doubt about it that what happened was illegal, and people knew it was illegal when it happened. Now, what does this mean for the long term? I don't want to be glum about this. I think if they think that if the organizers and the workers there want to have a second vote, I think they should go forward with it, right? And we'll support them just like we did in the first run. I think one of the tensions here, though, is that it's the difficult aspect of organizing at an Amazon facility in the first place. You have massive turnover, right? Massive turnover. So people who were voting in that first election might not even be there anymore. And Amazon has expressed itself as a company that is very willing to stifle dissent and to make people feel threatened. In all the postmortems, I think one of the most fundamental pieces of analysis that has come out has been with people who voted against joining the union. And one of those big arguments from them was that they were worried if they join the union, if there's a union, that Amazon will uproot itself, and these people will lose their jobs, and most importantly for a lot of them, their health insurance. And the truth of the matter is that the union wants to provide those things for folks. But in the current state of affairs, when it comes to a federal government that is unwilling to stand up for workers until it's a little bit, too little, too late, you can understand why people do have those concerns. I think these things can be overcome. I think David Story at the Valley Labor Report had a very good response to a tweet, and I should have had it up for y'all. But basically he said that there are criticisms and a lot of things that were said in the postmortem, but is it worth continuing to fight to give hope to the hopeless? And I tend to agree that I don't think that you should ever have the position that we shouldn't test ourselves and have fights when we can, right? So if the enthusiasm is there, absolutely, I think that it should happen again. I just want people to be realistic and to understand that there were a lot of factors and a lot of other avenues so like Amazon broke the rules in this first election. There's no doubt about it, right? And they got caught, and they are being exposed, and that means that there's going to be the chance of another election. But Amazon also is able to flex its muscle and do things that are, in my opinion, anti-democratic or authoritarian. We talk, a term I like to use is the dictatorship of the bosses, the dictatorship of the corporations. That is the reality that most working people experience every day when they go into work. And there aren't laws against that. That is the logic and the law of the land under American-style capitalism, right? The forces that we have to fight against that are unionization and working class power, right? But you have to understand that the arena that we're fighting in is their arena. And, Amazon was able to do a lot of other things that put pressure against people, that put pressure on people in that first vote that aren't going to get them into trouble with the NLRB, right? And we just need to recognize that when we're doing these fights, because they're hard and they're uphill, and you have to be honest with these things. So, the point is just to understand, let's do this. If people want to do it, let's do it again, have the fight. But also recognize this is the way that these corporations are able to influence, the way these corporations are able to influence, the way that these corporations are able to punish people, goes far beyond anything that the NLRB is willing to touch. But I'm really looking forward to seeing more and more as we go forward, and hoping to see this, a successful outcome. I really believe in, I know the people who are on the ground there, and doing this kind of organizing work. It was an incredibly inspiring operation, and I think that with all the attention it got in the first round, that a positive result is a possibility. I just think that we need to be honest and just understand, as socialists and people who are gearing ourselves up for a really, really, really long fight, that we don't tell ourselves bedtime stories about about these kind of things. And again, I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens. I think it's a huge, huge victory, and I also think it's worth noting that this is something that probably wouldn't have happened a few years ago. I'm talking about the pressure and the attention that brought the NLRB to make this decision. I think that that's something to notice and to recognize, that that's a more positive environment for us to be trying to do these kind of pushes in the future. So again, I think there's nothing that we can't do. I think there's nothing that working people can't do, but I just think it's really critical that we never, fall into, false narratives about things, because I think people who didn't really follow this story really closely are saying, okay, well, Amazon cheated, and that means, the result's going to be the opposite the next time. We don't know that. You have to do the work. That's it. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Well, the exciting thing, Lone Star Leftist says, maybe it will come from a different Amazon facility. I mean, the next union organizing effort. I mean, I think we'll be seeing, I would be very surprised if we don't see some activity or action in Bessemer. I just think that that's a very strong possibility. But I think that you're going to be seeing more and more actions across Amazon facilities across the country. I mean, don't forget, the Teamsters have made this a central plug of this next year, that they're going to try to work and bring more and more people who work in and around Amazon into the union. Right? I think that this is a really encouraging example. I mean, I think people realized and I don't think that people who are really deep in the union fight had any doubts about this beforehand. But I think that more people in the periphery realize just how galvanizing this kind of fight can be for folks, how inspiring it was, and how much it matters. And I just couldn't imagine, that this fight is just going to go out with the whimper. I think that it's spreading. So I think absolutely correct to say that we're going to be seeing more and more agitation across the country. Remember, we also interviewed folks at Amazonians United too. I mean, there's a lot of militancy across the board at these Amazon facilities and organizations surrounding it. So yeah, I think that's a very positive thing. I think that, and someone else asked, do you think the Teamsters are going to have an effect? I think so, for sure. Jacob says, like you said, when the first vote happened, Amazon made a choice to cheat, knowing full well it might get dinged for being illegal, but they still calculated it's better for them to cheat like this. I think that's correct. I agree with myself. I mean, no, seriously, it's just they know what they can do. They know that having, separating these fights into, multiple battles is helpful for them. I also have to remind people that, unionization fights typically take a really long time to win. And the hope at Amazon was a big long shot from the get-go. It was really exciting and galvanizing, and I think it was pretty incredible what they were able to do. But it's a long fight, and I know, and Amazon knows that, which is why they did everything that they could to make sure that there wasn't a pro-union vote there. From making people worried, that they'd just be able to up and leave. That Amazon would just up and leave, making people worried that they were being surveilled, and making people worried that they would lose their health insurance. It's definitely it was a calculated decision by them for sure. I think that's the right way to put it. But again, the movements are happening. And that's the really exciting thing. And this is a positive result. I mean, this is the kind of thing that should encourage you to remember that these, companies will get, the NLRB will engage. The unfortunate thing is like their ability and the scope of what they're able to do is pretty limited right now. Mark McKeever says, as a union man, I'm happy there's another chance at unionization. Absolutely. Champagne Communista says future union efforts should use that clip of Bezos going to space and saying his trip was possible thanks to the Amazon workers. 100%. Agree with that. And David's story, good to see you, man, is in there too, saying, going at it a second time, we can all expect a much larger pushback from Amazon this time, and they will cheat again. Without financial or civil penalties, there are zero disadvantages to not cheating. Yeah, I think you're right. And I think 100% right. And I think, maybe one of the larger lessons for people on the outside, and I mean that just people who aren't directly involved in these unionization efforts, is making that point, right? It's like, okay, so Amazon just got exposed for cheating in an election that everybody was watching. Everybody was watching this. I mean, this was, serious news. And there has to be severe penalties for organizations that are going to cheat like this. You just can't let them do this because they'll just do it over and over again. I think that's 100% right. And as I was saying earlier, and I, David and Jacob have been covering this too, is like, this wasn't the only thing that Amazon was doing. Right. And some of these things that they were doing, you can point out and say they're unethical and they're wrong. But that's also just the power that bosses have over workers. And we just have to be much more holistic in our critiques, too. And in our understanding of these things, because I saw the celebrations when this happened and I was thrilled to see the news as well. But I think there was a little disconnect from, casual observers and what they understood this meant to people who sort of had a better understanding of what this was going to mean going forward, and also what this meant for Amazon. Antonio says that statement from Bezos was one of the best examples I've ever seen of accidental Marxism. Michael said, I helped organize 2 protests in front of Amazon facility with a small org I'm a part of, linked up with the Amazonians United. It's great to hear. Bezos with the cowboy hat is a good argument to just be bald. Well, I think the funner thing is like the cowboy hat and the astronaut suit, personally. How is the Washington Post spinning all of this Amazon news? I got to say, the way that the Washington Post covers this stuff is not always as explicit as people make it out to be. I'm not saying that I think it's a good thing that Amazon owns the paper. I think the decisions and the way that they cover these things is a little bit more cynical than just like, oh, they're suppressing the big news about Amazon. They usually cover these things, but it's the slight spin that they put on it, and the little bits of context that they miss, or the fact that they have somebody like Megan McArdle, who's an opinion writer there and just is a complete idiot, who just makes defenses for basically any kind of like basic example, just blunt example of why wealth inequality in the United States is a bad thing. And we're not even talking about good social structural criticisms of it, just like the kind of things that most like basic liberals and working people get. Megan McArdle will try to spin it to make it seem like it's a good thing. She certainly was doing that with all of Jeff Bezos' stuff. I mean, there's going to be a lot more we're going to be seeing about this story out of Bessemer, and I think, take a moment and be able to celebrate good news, and the results of this, the recommendation from the NLRB is good news. But just, know what it actually represents so that we can be stronger going forward. I wanted to take this moment to talk about the other bit of frustrating news. I mean, frustrating is the wrong word. Despicable, disgusting news, anti-human news, that the United States Congress was unable to extend the eviction moratorium. And I know everybody listening here is aware of the fact. It's inexcusable. It's inexcusable. They knew a long time ago that something need to be done about it. All of the crocodile tears and nonsense that we're seeing right now from members of Congress is something that is contemptible, because these people knew exactly what was under threat. I mean, Nancy Pelosi went out and was saying, "Oh, we didn't know this was happening. We didn't know this was coming." They knew. What the hell are you talking about? And if you didn't know this, then you should not be the leader, the Speaker of the House. But they knew, and they made tactical decisions here. And I wanted to note a couple of things about this. One, because it's so despicable, and estimates are somewhere between 4 to 6 million people are likely to could potentially lose their homes in the next few weeks. I mean, those are astronomical numbers. I mean, that's a crisis if I've ever heard of one. But it reveals a few things and difficult things, I think, for progressives to swallow, and I think socialists should also be aware of these things as well. One, that let's not forget where this threat starts from. It starts from SCOTUS. It starts from the Supreme Court. And people who have been watching me in the show for a while know that that is an institution that I have absolute contempt for. And I think that people should stop playing games with it and recognize it for what it is: an anti-democratic institution that has been waging war on marginalized and working class people from its inception, right? Don't give me any more of this crap about what the Supreme Court is supposed to do in the abstract. Look at what it has done historically. Look at what it continues to do, and look at the role that it plays in politics today. And that's not a progressive one. It's extremely hyper-reactionary and conservative. Two, this is another great example of the press release president, Joe Biden, right? All this kind of, tears about the eviction crisis and all this kind of stuff, but yet they do absolutely nothing about it. A bunch of excuses made, trying to say oh, we don't have the authority to do this, this, and that. Matt and I were talking about for patrons yesterday about the fact that the Democratic Party operates very different from a lot of other political parties. But if you're the president of the United States, you are de facto the leader of the party. And that's how the parties operate. That's the logic by which they operate. And you've seen since they failed to extend the eviction moratorium, people have come out and said, House Democrats have come out and said, we had been told by our higher ups to wait until we had more guidance from the White House. And they got none. On top of it, we've seen, and people should read Branko Markovic who's a great writer for Jackman. He wrote a very prescient book on Joe Biden called Yesterday's Man. He had a good piece in Jackman today outlining the horrors of this, called The Democrats' Eviction Moratorium Failure is Unforgivable. And he really lays out the case. But I want to note a couple of the points that he makes in here. One is that what I just noted, right? That House Democrats are saying they had been told to wait for guidance from the White House and they didn't get it. Two, Nancy Pelosi's whole charade has been so despicable. One, to act like, oh, I didn't know it was coming, is absurd on its face, and that has rightfully been getting a lot of attention. But don't forget, now when this was brought up in the House, they brought it up as a unanimous consent vote, which is a decision by the Speaker of the House to hold a certain kind of vote. Well, why would she do that? Right? If she's so worried about fighting the Republicans who are fighting her tooth and nail and preventing her from implementing her progressive agenda, that it's somehow just waiting to be brought forward, but only these terrible Republicans are blocking it. Why would she empower them by choosing to hold this as a unanimous consent vote? Well, from what we've been getting in interviews and some allegations from other progressive members in Congress, is because not only was there Republican opposition to extending the eviction moratorium, there was plenty of opposition within the Democratic Party itself. And Nancy Pelosi, remembering that her first job is to stand up for the donors and the institution and the machine of the Democratic Party, and not to stand up for millions and millions of working people who are threatened with houselessness, after this eviction moratorium expires. She made the decision to hold a unanimous consent vote so that there would not be a record of this Democrat voting against it, that Democrat voting against it, because they were afraid of the backlash, the rightful backlash that these people would get. This was a deliberate shielding mechanism made by the Democratic Party to allow people to be kicked out of their homes because they're too cowardly to get their own party in line. In fact, they are so beholden to the real estate lobby interests that they will allow this to happen, even though it is immensely popular with the American people. This is one of those moments where this is not a political decision where they're saying, okay, what does the polling say? How is this going to affect my voting? This is them saying, okay, how is this going to affect the rich people who fund and also allow us to operate as a political party? It's a joke. They knew that allowing this to expire would be extremely unpopular, and they wanted to shield themselves and members of their own party from criticism. It's unconscionable. It's unacceptable. And it's just one of those things that sometimes it's just difficult to believe. Even though we understand all the reasons why they do what they do, to basically score such a obvious own goal on themselves is despicable to me. I don't know. I mean, these people seriously are monsters, and they should be held accountable for kicking these millions of people out onto the street. That's on them. That's on every one of them. All right, let me see. William H. Says, it's often said that capitalism pushes capitalists to continue to amass wealth. What structural features compel this, or is it them chasing power? Well, I mean, I guess to like explain this in the most general terms, it's like the trick of capitalism, the function of capitalism, the engine of capitalism is that capital makes you money, not work, right? Capital. What I mean by that is, in the most basic terms, if you invest money up front into capitalist production, you receive on the other side more money than you put in, right? That's where you get that's your profit, basically. And that kind of trick is why capitalists are consistently working to amass as much wealth as possible, right? That's like the kind of engine and basic logic of the system. I think you're asking a little bit more of like a personal question, like why continue to make as much money as possible, when you have it. And I'll tell you, I think one, it's because if you just have a lot of capital sitting around, your interest is in that growing. And two, the way that people sort of hold wealth, just in the incentives around it, and just basically all the people who are attached to it. I mean, like, let's just say you have like $100 million, right? Unfathomable to me, but imagine, that doesn't just sit in the bank. That sits in all of these different kind of investments, and you have a lot of people typically working on it for you, right? And those people are paid to continue to increase the value of, the initial sum that was given to them. And that's just is going to be a kind of, it's not automated because people are doing it. But there's a lot of people who have interest in you making more money because they get a little bit of it, right? I mean, that's just the kind of general sense. I hope that is of help. Artist Riley says, what do you make of the relentless news stories regarding the worker shortage? It's almost daily on my local news. I'm skeptical of the narrative on both sides. I think there's no doubt about it, that this is a purposeful thing. I mean, they tell these stories because they benefit certain people. And those people, specifically the ones who are at the crux of like talking about this like worker shortage thing, are low-wage employers. We're frustrated that there have been some kind of baseline protections. Evictions is a great example of that. Having people not being kicked out of their homes has given some people on the more marginal parts of the labor market a little bit more ability to say no to things that are just absurd and inexcusable. Getting paid $7.25 an hour anywhere in this country, let alone places like Texas, right? People can't afford to work. And it's one of those kind of things. It's like you're sort of bought in because you have all of these bills over your head. But, the hope is with, unemployment benefits and eviction moratoriums that people have had a little bit more room to find something better for themselves. And that's really hurt those who employ people at the lowest legal amount possible. And those people who employ people at that level tend to have pretty strong relationships with the local news organizations. I mean, how much coverage on your local news channel is also just like kind of weird feel good stories about small and local business, right? That's why it's getting pumped out, and it's certainly getting pumped out because more and more companies more and more of American finance is invested in the rental market. So they have an incentive too to make sure that this kind of moratorium is ended. So they tell these stories like, well, the problem is all these people are just lazy now and they're just sitting around on their butts and they just get free apartments, right? Which is not the case anywhere. We've just sort of put in some kind of very basic humane protections for people that are all set to expire. And they shouldn't expire. And that's a big threat to to a certain class of people. So they've been trying to push the local news to create a panic around it. David Story says, does it not seem the Dems are following the same policy as the GOP, just without the terrible statements? I honestly don't see much difference in policy regarding COVID response. I hear you. I think it's even worse than that. In the sense that what's happening right now with the Democratic Party and all of these benefits that were extremely popular, from unemployment to the eviction moratorium, these kind of things that people understand just intuitively as like humane programs. Well, what is Biden overseeing? The dismantling of all of these things, right? Trump was not the architect of these systems. I don't want people to misunderstand me. But Trump was Trump and the GOP, those are the people who delivered it. And when the Democrats came into power, it all went away. I mean, what kind of message are you trying to send to people? When you tell people that these are the most important elections of your lifetime, these are life and death, and then you come in and you oversee the dismantling of extremely popular programs instead of expanding them and saying that this is our legacy and we're going to build on it and do something better. They say, oh man, we're so powerless. We don't have the ability to do anything, man. And actually, I talked to some folks and the parliamentarian told us that we actually can't pass this kind of relief package. I mean, give me a break. It's a joke. You never saw the GOP do that. I see them just sort of walking right into a complete defeat in 2022 with this stuff, and it completely bogs my mind. I understand structurally why the Democrats don't want to do things that are permanent, right? That help out working people permanently. But boy, oh boy, I mean, I feel like they're fumbling big time here. When they have the opportunity to say look, it's the Republicans who are trying to kick you out of your house. The Republicans are trying to prevent you from getting unemployment benefits. The Republicans are doing this, and that. Instead, it's this saga, which is mainly, I think, aimed at, if I'm just thinking politically about the kind of how you sell yourself. I think it's really just pointed towards a kind of, the upper middle class suburban audiences that voted for Biden in the first place. They didn't vote for Biden to help out people. They voted for Biden because they didn't want to be associated with Trump and Trumpism. And, I think that kind of devil's deal that was made there was, we're seeing the results of that. Anyone in DC, go visit Corey on the Steps. I think that's great. Billy Big Brick says, I'm so black-pilled. What do I do? Go outside, talk to some folks, and remember that, these kind of, it's too easy to get so ironied out and to just realize that things are bad. People have been saying that forever, and, it's much more radical to be hopeful. It's much better, too, for your health. Let me see. Oh, yeah. Let's do a little cross promotion there. Some MDR has been listening to Literary Hangover, Matt's excellent podcast. Love the episode where David was the guest, talking about Oscar Wilde. Yeah, that was a hell of a lot of fun. Yeah, MDR is talking about, we're talking about basically capital investing. It says, watch David Harvey talk about this too, how money just makes more money instead of labor or actual productive work. Yeah, it's been a little while for me to remember exactly where, but Engels has a kind of great line about where, because of this dynamic, finance, capital in particular, always tries to escape production, right? Because it's like, because, for them, I don't want people to misunderstand what I was saying earlier too, like, for them, you invest money and it just turns into more money. But the actual process of that is that people are working and are manipulating the world around them, creating value, and they get exploited and someone else extracts that value from them, right? Finance forgets that a lot, and they try to come up with more and more absurd schemes to try to divorce themselves completely from production. I mean, you talk to people who do serious investing, right? Big money investing. And it was an interesting thing being in New York for a while, because you bump into people like that every once in a while. And, you start to ask them about things that are happening in the U.S. economy, the actual economy, the working economy. And it's just, it's a completely uninteresting topic to them. But you talk to them about like brand values and things like that. And their eyes light up, and you realize that so much of the U.S. economy in particular is become so speculative. So many of the growers, the things that really drive, profit in the U.S. right now, are these tech companies. Which they do some kind of level of production, but mainly it's just distribution of already existing media products. I'm talking about things like Netflix and Spotify even, or just, cannibalizing already existing activity. And what's the value at the end of the day? The value is the company and like the idea of it. And that's very shaky. And you really need a lot of money floating around, right? A lot of liquidity to encourage that. And we've been living under almost a couple decades now of, high liquidity out there, which just allows for more and more of these speculative activities to occur. Yo, what up? Grady says, hey man. William says, David, would you have Bill Fletcher Jr. on LR to talk about how Democrats refuse to rub? I don't know what the last bit is, but I would love to have Bill Fletcher Jr. on. We had him on TMBS, which was a great honor for us. I'd be very happy to do it again. Let me see. It'll crack me up. All right, Patrick Stevens says, it's crazy how in Capital, the arguments made in the fact reports made by capitalists against factory legalization were very similar to arguments made against minimum wage increases, made today. Oh, yeah. I mean, thanks again, Patrick, for the super chat there. I mean, it's one of those things. I mean, it's so funny. We had our friends from, This Machine Kills, on the podcast to sort of break down, Jathan Sadowski in particular is breaking down how if you read or watch a movie like Modern Times, right? Charlie Chaplin, early 20th century, black and white, no talking, kind of film. You watch a movie like that and it feels at a certain level, oh, this is sort of ancient, right? This is, vintage, this is old. But then you pay attention to it and you compare that to what's happening on the Amazon shop floor and you realize, oh, Lord, we really are living in the future that they were worried about in these kind of films. And again, if people haven't seen Modern Times, Charlie Chaplin was certainly a communist. in modern times, like the big part of the film is Charlie Chaplin is a factory worker, and he's being observed constantly. He's being surveilled constantly. His just basic human needs, the right to be able to eat and use the restroom and things of that nature, are being limited by his bosses. And then you look at what's happening at Amazon, and you're just seeing technology really showing up in a way to benefit the capitalists. How do I mean that? I mean, Amazon uses tracking people's phones to monitor how often they're in the restroom, how long it takes them to produce certain goods, right? And they have all this data on people, and they use that to make automated decisions about who to fire and how many people to hire. So much so that, like, if you, and I know people who are listening to this have worked at Amazon facilities, because it's becoming almost like a universal right of Americans to sweat at an Amazon facility at this point. I can't tell you the amount of people I know around me and my family and friends and community who are, doing this kind of work now, because it's becoming, for a lot of people, one of the few jobs in town. And people don't even have the dignity of being called into somebody's office to be let go at these facilities. You get a message, you're done. Your metrics weren't up. It's not even a human at the other end of it. It's a machine. I just bring that up to note that, like, despite all these kind of notions that some people have that, oh, we're in a different form of capitalism just because some of the work that we're doing is a little bit different, you'd be very, very much mistaken. This, like, the factory shop floors that we're living through today are a capitalist dream. And rewatching some of those old films or arguments from the early 20th century are a real reminder of that. So it's just I bring that up in response to what Patrick mentioned earlier about capital, just because it is funny sometimes. You can feel like these texts are dated, and there's some updates that have to be done, just like anything. But you do realize the core of them is very similar, and that's the kind of dialectical aspect of capitalism, is that as much as things change, they sort of stay the same, right? But yeah, thank you so much. Grotti says, did you have Alex Press, who's doing the Primer podcast on Amazon, which is amazing on already, would fit perfectly into this topic? That's a great idea. I like Alex Press a lot. She had a good piece out with a great gentleman too. He has a cool book coming out, Nietzsche, about what Amazon's internal documents show about how they think about value, and it's very interesting and very frightening, certainly. Enrique, our man Enrique, has been wanting people to check this out, and I still need to get to it too. Everyone check out Paul Cockshott, Cyber Communism, which seems to be one of the big questions of the day. So I'm not, I was messaging Enrique the other day. I haven't had a chance to look at any of that stuff yet, but I'd be very happy to look into it. Along to Social Club says Orwell's Down and Out in Paris and London is on point too. That's a great example. I mean, I would love to hear from y'all who are here in the chat. I mean, there's a few of us right now, about your experiences. I mean, we all sort of fall into work in different industries, right? And usually it's easy to stick to one or two. My earliest work experiences were doing, concrete and construction work. But I also have plenty of bar experience, bar and restaurant. And Orwell's Down and Out in Paris and London is such a striking book too, because, that's basically a book about him being a poor working member of society, working class member of society, both Paris and London. He works in some, ridiculous, fancy, opulent restaurant in Paris, deep in the depths. And it's a really great example of class society. And it's funny because it's, it's dated in the sense it's like, we're approaching 100 years from it being published. But it is funny. I remember when I was first reading it, I was working at a restaurant in South Carolina. That was one of those places that, well, not as fancy as a French bistro or something like that. It was expensive enough that, what we were producing and the people we were producing it for were very different from us. or at least it felt that way. And it was just funny, like just seeing how people were trying to build lives around that work. I mean, what I mean by that is like trying to see if you can have enough money to maybe buy a ring for your partner, or trying to find a place that you can afford to live so that you can maybe have children, right? All of those things are almost identical. Obviously, cultural context is different, but to what is going on with Orwell and his coworkers, from the beautiful aspirational stuff like, oh, I need to buy a ring for my wife, to some of the difficult things that come with being a poor working class person in the U.S., where some people making some bad decisions about getting involved in kind of illicit activities to get by. Which is not trying to glorify that. I think a lot of people sort of struggle with that reality, but people who know. Poverty doesn't make us out. Poverty is not a ripe environment for everybody to make the most moral and just decisions, and that's one of the cruelties of capitalism, I would argue, is that it puts us in these desperate situations. But anyways, I bring that up because I like Orwell, because he, on those contexts, I know there's a lot of questions about Orwell's politics and things like that, but as a chronicler of that time and working class experiences, I think he's very truthful, right? It's not some kind of just stupid and vapid account of the glory of the proletariat and the inhumane bourgeoisie. It's a little grayer. I mean, not saying that it certainly tells the truth, right? Is that there's one group that's being exploited and one group that's the exploiter. But we all also live in this world too. And I don't know. I find when it comes to literature that deals with class issues like that, I always find it better and more relatable to sort of tell those true stories. Because again, I think people who really grew up working class, I think, understand these things a little bit better than some people who, are just standing with us, which we appreciate very much. Lone Star Leftist says, I was once left go by being told I hadn't met my quota. They repeated the phrase, but never said the words fired or let go. I came in the next week and my time card wasn't there. Wow. Is that at the Amazon facility? But that's just so despicable to do that, right? And that's just like the complete move of, this is like, capitalism turns men into machines, right? Humans into machines. And that's one of those things that these like high, these kind of advanced surveillance technologies allow them to do. I'll see if I can let Matt know about these DMs. If you get Matt to answer a message, you're a very lucky man. I have a difficult time getting Matt to answer my text messages, just saying. Welcome, Shane. Civ says, I was a bike courier, so always ask Amazon drivers if they need the WC. I'm not familiar with that represents. I'm sorry. My dream is to start a co-op bar. I love it, man. That sounds like fun. I've told in the post game a couple of weeks ago, I told a story about a very brief period of time at a bar I worked at in D.C. where all of the managers and the owners just basically start to disappear. And even though we weren't all sharing in the profits, because it was going to someone else, we were free of, a lot of supervision, which was a very incredible moment. It was a lot of fun. The automated firing is identical to being sacked in that text. Yeah, I think so too. How often would customers act awfully to wait staff? I mean, all the time. It's like, that just comes with the job in this country. I would be curious if people have worked in places outside of the South and in the South, how they would feel about comparing the two. It's hard to do that holistically, right? Because the places you work at obviously change so much, right? If you're working in, one kind of establishment that's more like family friendly or something like that versus a bar, I feel like the contexts are very different. But I don't know. The Southern stuff can be funny because people get really worked up about in my opinion, stupid stuff. Like, you didn't fill up my like sweet tea enough. It's like, man, I gave you 4 glasses in an hour seating. And people can get real crazy about that. Up north, it was, for me, in my experience, and maybe it was just because people were a lot more well off there. There was a lot of sort of dehumanizing way people were treating you, even when they weren't being outwardly rude. Bad experience. Shane says, I did construction with my dad, but started lifeguarding, pool boying, parlayed teaching swim lessons and cleaning pools, become a classroom teacher. That's awesome. Let me see. Oh, bathroom. WC equals water closet. Yeah, thank you. I always forget about those things. Let me see. Water closet, that ain't right. All right, y'all. Target is top-down authoritarian. My manager told me they let a cashier continue to steal until she broke $1,000 because they wanted to charge her with a felony. Jesus Christ. Sorry. Yeah, with the mental health issues of the pandemic, I feel the abuse from customers is going to be worse for a while. I mean, people have been nuts. I mean, y'all seen that video of everyone going crazy on the planes, the most recent one, they tied that kid up who was saying their parents were worth $2 million. I mean, that was something else. I was very happy to see that the union for the airline stewards was standing up for them, because it was a Frontier flight, and I think Frontier suspended the flight attendants who, after this guy punched somebody and fondled two women, they basically tied them to their chair while they were in the air, and Frontier suspended all those employees, and the union for the flight attendants said, absolutely not. You need to reinstate those people immediately. I was happy to see. Raul says, would you guys ever have Chomsky in the show? What do you think? Yeah, I'd love that. I mean, I'd be happy to do it. I mean, I'd be happy to have Chomsky on. I feel a little bad, though, if I'm being completely honest with you. I feel like Chomsky's been asked to do a little bit too many podcasts over the past few weeks. I'm not trying to criticize anybody too much, but boy, that guy needs a little bit of a rest, especially when people were asking him, like, Chomsky, what do you think about forced to vote? Chomsky, I was like, Jesus Christ, boy. This man's gone down to Arizona, right, to hang out a little bit and write some books. Like, yeah, I give him a little bit of a damn break. But in all seriousness, I mean, we would love to have conversations with him. I know Matt is a big fan. We're really happy to have him on TMBS when we did too. Damn, someone else is saying they've heard of park rangers who are getting attacked too in Hawaii. Yeah, I mean, people are getting. I mean, you know what it is. It's certainly, all of the bizarre things that we're living through and pandemic and all that, but it's mask stuff, and people get really worked up about that. I mean, all right, y'all. I think I appreciate everybody hanging out, and it's been nice chatting. I'll see y'all next Tuesday. For a Griscom stream, and come in and tune in tomorrow. Matt and I are going to be chatting with Ryan Pollock, who is a union organizer here, talking about the just transition, and how we can really find a path towards power. I think we're really wanting to do. We're really wanting to, to start to move these conversations around climate catastrophe into roadmaps, because we know the slogans, we know the truth of the matter. And we need to start figuring out how we're going to get there. And the politics are grim. I just think that we need to tell the truth about it. The politics are really grim. But if we can start finding ways to make these programs popular with working people, especially people in the industries that are affected, and could be influential in shifting this dynamic, I think that is worth doing. Please always feel free to reach out. And if you would like to, please consider supporting the show at patreon.com/leftreckoning. All right, I will see y'all tomorrow afternoon. tomorrow evening, 7 p.m. Central.